Caleb had never seen the university at night like this. The sprawling campus, usually buzzing with noise and energy, now sat hushed beneath the glow of flickering lamps. Shadows stretched long between brick buildings. His shoes echoed on the concrete path as he walked alone, carrying the ring of campus-issued keys that still felt too heavy for his part-time maintenance job. He'd only been working nights for 2 weeks, mostly emptying bins, fixing stuck doors, and logging supply checks. It was simple enough, but tonight the checklist included something he hadn't seen before. Inspect lockup behind Building 6. Ensure doors are sealed. Inventory old science equipment. He had to reread it. Lockup behind Building 6. He didn't remember any building back there. But orders were orders. Building 6 itself was one of the older science halls. The windows had been boarded up since the labs moved to the new tech wing, and no one used the place anymore. He circled around the structure, passing overgrown hedges and cracked pavement until he spotted it. It wasn't even a building, really. More of a squat, metal-sided structure tucked between 2 crumbling brick walls. The only light came from a lone bulb above the rusted double doors, and even that buzzed and flickered like it was dying. Caleb checked the checklist again, took a breath, and fit the key into the padlock. The lock snapped open with a metallic click that sounded too loud in the quiet. He pushed the door open. The stale scent of dust, rust, and aged paper spilled out. Inside was a large, warehouse-like room. No windows, concrete floor, rows of mismatched shelving, and pallets stacked with unmarked boxes. The far end was drowned in darkness. Fluorescent lights overhead hummed faintly, casting cold white light over the nearest rows, but left most of the place veiled in shadow. He hesitated at the entrance. Something about the space made him feel noticed. "Get it over with," he muttered and stepped in. He moved carefully, his footsteps muted by layers of dust. Most of the shelves were filled with outdated lab gear, glass containers, dented filing cabinets, warped cardboard boxes. He walked a wide circle, checking shelves as he went. Nothing out of place, nothing worth inventorying. Still, the checklist said to do it. As he reached the back wall, his flashlight caught something strange. A tall filing cabinet pulled away from the wall with space behind it. Curiosity got the better of him. He stepped around and found a door. It looked like it had been sealed with a heavy bolt that was now broken off and hanging by a thread. There was no mention of a back room. He paused, thought about turning around. Then, with one reluctant hand, he opened it. The door creaked open slowly, revealing a pitch-black space beyond. Cold air breathed out from the dark. He turned on his flashlight. The beam landed on white tile flooring, clean and strangely polished. The walls were smooth and gray, industrial, not like the dusty storage space outside. The corridor stretched straight ahead with no windows, no lights, no signs. "What is this?" Caleb whispered. This wasn't a lockup. This was something else. He should have left. He knew that. But something urged him on. He stepped inside. The air changed instantly, sterile, cold, and heavy with silence. The hallway was wide enough to walk 2 across, but there was no furniture, no signs of life, just blank walls. He followed the corridor for maybe 20 feet before he came across the first room. A door cracked open to his left. He peeked inside. A classroom? Sort of. Rows of narrow tables faced a wall-sized chalkboard, but the board was smeared and covered in unfamiliar symbols. strange equations and scribbles that didn't look like any scientific notations he'd seen before. The chairs had straps on the arms. "Okay, that's enough," he said aloud, heart pounding. He turned to leave. But the hallway behind him was different. There was no door back. The corridor had turned. He stood frozen for a moment, then hurried back the way he came. His steps quickened, echoing louder now. Left, right, a corner, a longer hallway, another door on the side, this one open. He peeked again, and his breath caught. The room was filled with mirrors, dozens of them, wall to wall, floor to ceiling, but they weren't reflecting him properly. He raised his flashlight and looked at one directly. In the mirror, he saw himself, but something was behind him. A figure, pale, tall, motionless. He turned. Nothing. He looked back at the mirror. It was gone. He staggered back out into the hallway and ran. No more checking rooms, just find a way out. The corridors wound in impossible shapes now. Stairs leading down that curved sideways. Doorways that opened into the same hallway he'd just left. The more he moved, the more the layout seemed to shift behind him. Finally, out of breath, he burst into a larger chamber. Square, empty, except for one thing, a desk, and on the desk, a clipboard with a page that looked eerily like his checklist. He stepped forward. New entry added. Caleb, arrival confirmed. Observation in progress. The pen was still resting on the clipboard. "Nope," he said aloud. "No." He turned. The wall he came from was gone. A blank surface now. He backed away, flashlight flickering. Something moved. At the far corner of the room, the shadows shifted. He saw it only for a second. Too tall, its joints bending wrong, its head tilting in that too slow, too smooth way that humans never moved. He ran. Didn't think. Just moved. He slammed through a side door and down a hallway, turning corners blindly, and then, like stepping through a curtain, he was back in the storage lockup. Concrete floors, cardboard boxes, dust. He gasped, nearly dropping his light. The door behind him was gone. Just the filing cabinet against the wall again, perfectly in place. He staggered backward, heart hammering, and fled through the main doors of the lockup into the cool night air. The sky had begun to lighten. Dawn was coming. He didn't stop until he was back in the maintenance office, slamming the keys onto the desk. He quit that morning. No one ever asked why. Weeks passed, then a month. Caleb moved on, transferred schools, started new work. He never told anyone what happened. Not fully. But sometimes, late at night, he dreams of blank hallways, chalkboards with crawling symbols, and mirrors that don't reflect him quite right. And he always wakes before seeing what's behind him. Brandon was a computer science major in his final year, and a part of his work-study program involved helping maintain the outdated printers and computer labs across campus. Most of the work was routine, clearing paper jams, replacing toner, restarting frozen terminals. But there was one building he always tried to avoid: Marvelo Hall. Tucked away near the back of the university grounds, Marvelo Hall was one of the oldest buildings on campus. Once home to the engineering department, it had been largely decommissioned in favor of newer facilities. Only a few rooms on the ground floor remained active, mostly storage spaces and some temporary faculty offices. Still, the IT department occasionally received automated maintenance tickets from the printers in the building. Brandon had ignored the ticket for room B12 twice already. It kept showing up in his queue every few days, flagging printer offline and device unreachable. Eventually, his supervisor told him to check it out. "It's probably just unplugged. You're on shift tonight anyway. Might as well clear it out of the system." He went after hours to avoid missing class. Marvelo Hall was quiet when he arrived. No janitor, no staff, just the distant hum of the streetlights outside. The main hallway was dim, most of the overhead lights dead or flickering. Room B12 was at the end, tucked behind a small alcove near the emergency exit. He tried the door. Locked. Frowning, Brandon pulled out his university-issued badge and tapped the access pad. To his surprise, the light turned green and the lock clicked open. Inside, the room was cold and smelled like dry paper and dust. The printer sat in the corner, a squat, dusty unit blinking an amber error light. Brandon checked the cables, plugged in. He tried to restart it, but nothing changed. Then he noticed something strange. The printer was an old model that should have been retired last year. It wasn't even on the active registry anymore. He stepped back and checked the room itself. Desks lined the wall, all covered in files and broken monitors. It didn't look like anyone had used this space in years. He took a few pictures for the ticket report and was about to leave when the printer came to life. It whirred loudly, paper feeding through the rollers. 1 sheet, 2, 3. Brandon stepped closer and saw the printout. Black and white grainy images, like security footage. The hallway outside, then another sheet, his face at the door. Then another, him standing inside, staring at the printer. His heart jumped. He hadn't sent anything to print. He picked up the pages, flipping through. Each one showed him in real time from angles that weren't possible. One even showed the back of his head, though there was no camera in the room. The printer spat out one final page, a pitch-black photo with a single pale shape near the back wall. It looked like someone crouched behind the filing cabinet. Brandon spun around. The room was empty. Dead silent. He backed out slowly, leaving the papers on the desk. The hallway was darker now. The emergency lights buzzed overhead. He walked fast, glancing behind him every few steps. When he reached the exit, his badge didn't work. He tried the side door. Nothing. Even his phone showed no service, though the campus had full coverage. Panic rising, Brandon returned to B12. The door was open again. The printer sat silent. The pages were gone. Then he heard it, a rustling, faint like paper sliding off a desk. From the next room. Then footsteps. Slow, deliberate, but no voices, no light. Brandon ducked behind the desk in B12, holding his breath. The footsteps stopped outside the door. The lights flickered. He waited, heart pounding, not daring to move. Minutes passed. Then, his phone buzzed. A signal returned. With shaking hands, he opened the flashlight app, then bolted from the room. This time, the side door opened. Cold air hit his face as he stumbled out into the night. He didn't stop running until he reached the security office. They checked the building, of course. Found it empty. But no one could explain why B12 was still active, why the access pad had logged him in, or why the printer, long decommissioned, was back online. Brandon didn't argue. He just marked the ticket resolved and asked to be reassigned to another building. Occasionally, late at night, The system flags a new printer error in Marvelo Hall. He doesn't go back. No one remembered when room B13 was last used. It wasn't on the floor plans anymore. No professors taught there. No student clubs met inside it. Most assumed it had been converted or sealed off decades ago, until Jordan discovered the door. He hadn't meant to. He was only helping his academic advisor, Professor Keller, clean out the back of the records annex, a musty storage wing behind the main campus library. The floorboards creaked with every step. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like dying insects. Keller was combing through ancient transcripts, while Jordan shifted battered filing cabinets out of the way to make room for a new shelf system. That's when one of the filing cabinets slid farther than it should have. Its metal base scraped loudly, and underneath it, covered in dust and spider webs, was a small, square metal door, about 3 feet high. "Hey, Professor," Jordan called. "There's something behind this cabinet." Keller looked up and frowned. "That's odd. Don't touch it yet." But Jordan had already squatted down, brushing away the thick layer of dust. The door had no label, no handle, just a small square keyhole in the center. The metal was cold, much colder than the rest of the room. Professor Keller crouched beside him. He didn't speak for a few seconds. Then, in a low voice, he said, "I've been here for 20 years. Never seen that before." Jordan glanced at him. "Think we should open it?" Keller hesitated. If it's part of the old sub-levels, it could be structurally unsound. Best to leave it alone for now. Jordan nodded. But as Keller returned to his papers, Jordan couldn't stop staring at the door. That night he dreamed about it. In the dream, the door was open. Beyond it was a staircase going down into the dark, lit only by a swinging bulb and the sound of something breathing. 2 days later, Jordan came back alone. He shouldn't have. But curiosity, as it always did, won. He waited until 10 p.m. when the library staff were gone. The annex was technically restricted after hours, but Jordan still had his keys from the project. He slipped inside, flashlight in one hand, and found the cabinet just where he'd left it. The door was still there, but something was different. A faint draft blew from the tiny keyhole, cold and steady, and etched into the metal now, which hadn't been there before, were the words, "Do not open twice." Jordan felt a shiver crawl up his spine. The message hadn't been there earlier. He was sure of it. Still, he'd come this far. He knelt again and examined the keyhole. It was a standard university maintenance lock. He tried the keys on his ring and, unbelievably, the fourth one turned. With a metallic click, the door creaked open, swinging inward with a groan. Beyond it, just like in his dream, was a staircase, a narrow concrete stairwell spiraling downward, barely wide enough for a person. The air was colder than it should have been and smelled faintly of mildew and copper. Jordan hesitated, then switched on his flashlight and descended. The steps felt endless. He counted 47 before the passage opened into a room, square, concrete, and windowless. The walls were lined with what looked like wooden lockers or cubbies. Each one had a number burned into the front. But that wasn't what made him stop. It was the sound, a slow, steady shuffling from deeper within the room, like someone dragging a foot or something heavier. He froze. "Hello?" he whispered. The shuffling stopped. Silence. His flashlight flicked just for a second, and when it came back, one of the lockers near him was open. A single object sat inside, a university ID card. His ID. He stepped closer. The photo was him, but it looked wrong, like it had been aged or altered. The back of the card was stained with something dark. Then another sound. Click. He spun. The stairwell door had closed behind him. Panic swelled in his chest. He ran back, pounding on the door. "Hey, open up!" It didn't budge. He fumbled for his keys, but the lock was gone. The keyhole had vanished. The metal was smooth. He was trapped. The room seemed to darken. Not physically. The flashlight still worked, but the space felt heavier. The lockers were no longer still. Some of them were vibrating. Faint, rattling sounds came from within, like nails tapping wood, and then whispering. It started as a low murmur and grew louder. Voices, dozens of them layered over one another, all saying the same thing, out of sync. "You came back. You came back. You came back." Jordan backed into a corner. "What the hell is this?" he shouted. One locker burst open. Inside was a mirror. Not just any mirror. It showed the room, but not as it was. In the reflection, the lockers were all open. Something was stepping out of them. Figures, human-shaped but blurred, faceless and wet-looking, like clay that hadn't set. They turned to the mirror, and then they turned toward him. Jordan looked up. The room was empty. But he didn't wait. He bolted across the concrete floor, skidding as he looked for another exit. On the far wall, behind a fallen cabinet, was a hatch, small and square. He dove for it, wrenching it open. A ladder. Going up. Without thinking, he climbed. He emerged into another hallway. But it wasn't the annex. It looked like part of the chemistry building, but older, out of place, like stepping into a photo from the 1970s. The walls were green-tinted tile, and the lights overhead buzzed with a faint yellow glow. The hallway was empty. He sprinted down it, ignoring the whispering now growing behind him. Every time he passed a door, the lights dimmed. His name echoed in distant voices. At the end of the corridor was an emergency exit. He shoved it open and burst out into the cold night air. He was back behind the library. And when he turned, the hallway he'd come through was gone. Just a brick wall where the exit had been. Campus security found him sitting on the sidewalk near the records annex, pale and shaking. He told them he'd gotten locked inside by mistake. They wrote it off as a late-night accident. Keller offered him a nervous smile the next day and said nothing more about the cabinet. When Jordan tried to show him the small metal door, it wasn't there anymore. The cabinet wouldn't budge. The floor below it was solid. But a week later, Jordan checked his backpack. Inside one of the pockets was the mirror from the locker room, small, wrapped in cloth. He never remembered taking it. He still keeps it. And sometimes, when he glances into it at the wrong angle, he sees the lockers behind him. Still closed. For now.